So we have the living hostages all back. They returned some more today. It's a gruesome process. I almost hate to talk about it. But they're digging. They're actually digging. There are areas where they're digging and they're finding a lot of bodies. We want the weapons to be given up, sacrificed, and they've agreed to do it. Now they have to do it. And if they don't do it, we'll do it.
We had the head of CENTCOM today suggest that Hamas needs to hurry up and disarm and follow your comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
That it was the head of CENTCOM saying that. Is that not a signal to Hamas, to the rest of the world, that at some point the U.S. military may more directly engage?
We won't need the U.S. military. We won't need it. We're going to because we're very much involved in it. If we weren't involved, there wouldn't be peace.
The so-called 13-hour clause, I will add, somewhat mischievously, has led some to suggest that from tomorrow, everyone in the country will be working 13 hours a day. Is that the case? It is not. Can it happen every day? No, it cannot. How often then? Only up to 37 days per year. That is roughly 3 days per month.
Not even the employers came to defend the logic of the 13-hour workday. Not even them. You had to question them persistently in the committee before. Their representatives finally lowered their heads and mumbled, "Well, yes, maybe." Because this law is a law that institutionalizes exhaustion. Because instead of reducing working hours and improving quality of life, you are increasing working hours and diminishing quality of life.
U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed on Wednesday that he authorized the Central Intelligence Agency to conduct covert operations in Venezuela.
I authorized for two reasons, really.
Trump told reporters his reasons were migration of Venezuelans to the U.S. and drug trafficking. Trump has, in recent months, ordered a large U.S. military buildup in the southern Caribbean. Troops have conducted at least 5 strikes on vessels the Trump administration has described as involved in drug trafficking, without providing evidence. The CIA authorization marks a sharp escalation in U.S. efforts to pressure President Nicolas Maduro's government. The New York Times first reported the classified directive, citing U.S. officials familiar with the decision. The report said the Trump administration's Venezuela strategy aims to remove Maduro from power. Trump declined to answer when asked if the CIA has the authority to execute Maduro.
Oh, I don't want to answer a question like that. That's a ridiculous question for me to be given. Not really a ridiculous question, but wouldn't it be a ridiculous question for me to answer? But I think Venezuela's feeling heat.
Venezuela's government said Trump's remarks constituted a violation of international law and said U.S. actions were aimed at legitimizing a, quote, regime change operation with the goal of seizing the country's oil resources. Venezuela's foreign minister said his country would raise a complaint with the UN Security Council and Secretary General. Reuters could not independently determine what specific actions Trump has authorized, and the White House declined to elaborate on the president's comments.
Pakistan and Afghanistan agreed to a temporary ceasefire on Wednesday after airstrikes and ground fighting ramped up tensions between the South Asian neighbors. The UN says the renewed conflict has killed at least 18 and left hundreds wounded. A Pakistani foreign ministry statement said the two countries would implement a temporary ceasefire for 48 hours, starting 1300 GMT on Wednesday, adding the truce was requested by Kabul. However, an Afghan Taliban spokesman said the ceasefire was due to the insistence of the Pakistani side. He said Kabul had directed its forces to observe the truce, provided the other side does not commit aggression. Fighting broke out over the weekend, prompting the closing of borders, halting trade, and stranding families. Fresh conflict then erupted on Wednesday. In video provided by the Pakistan Armed Forces, an armored vehicle that it said belonged to Afghan Taliban is seen to be damaged by a bomb attack and spin back. Another bomb is seen hitting a structure, which the ISPR said was a Taliban border post. Each side also accused the other of launching ground attacks. The Afghan Taliban said more than a dozen of its civilians were killed and 100 wounded as Pakistani forces launched attacks and spin back. Pakistan denied this and said 4 of its civilians were wounded in attacks by Taliban forces. The recent friction between the former allies erupted after Islamabad demanded that the Afghan Taliban act to rein in militants who it says have stepped up attacks in Pakistan, saying they operated from havens in Afghanistan. The Taliban denies this charge and accuses the Pakistani military of spreading misinformation, provoking border tensions, and sheltering militants. Pakistan's military denies all those charges.
The real war started after the war, I believe, because today our suffering has increased. We are waiting for the aid. There is none. There are logistical problems, water, and the equipment which they said will enter to remove the rubble. None of this entered.
When the borders first opened, we were happy. We were clapping and cheering and saying the war had stopped. But the next day, there were no signs or proof it had stopped. Nothing. We are displaced. What are we waiting for? We have been displaced for 2 years now. What can we do? What did we do wrong?
Luis Raul Velázquez's house was among the worst hit when floodwaters surged through Huauchinango, a mountain town in central Mexico. Mud filled his home, sweeping away personal belongings. A small physiotherapy clinic he had built with his daughter was also destroyed.
Unfortunately, we lost everything. Furniture, beds, the refrigerators, the stove, clothes, tools. This is where I had my workshop. Fortunately, we were able to save our pets. We're just happy to be alive.
5 days after historic floods killed more than 60 people and left dozens missing, rescue and cleanup operations were still being delayed by thick mud and massive piles of debris. The disaster has affected 100,000 homes across central and eastern Mexico, prompting a large-scale emergency response. In Poza Rica, families remain trapped amid rubble and foul-smelling sludge. Residents told Reuters that aid has been slow to arrive, forcing many to use makeshift tools to clear mud and search for belongings. Some, like Guadalupe Martinez, fear outbreaks of disease if cleanup efforts don't speed up.
We need them to speed up the cleanup because later we will have mosquitoes and an epidemic and it will get worse.
President Claudia Sheinbaum faces mounting pressure as criticism over the government's response grows. On Sunday, she was confronted by an angry crowd searching for relatives in Veracruz, where at least 29 people have died. After a year of meteoric approval ratings, the disaster is emerging as a key test for Sheinbaum, who has encountered rare hostility during visits to affected areas.
After Poland shot down Russian drones that entered its airspace in September, several other drone-related incidents across Europe have left EU leaders increasingly anxious about airspace protection. They're urgently calling for a defense system, throwing out terms like a drone wall.
Propose immediate actions to create the drone wall.
But the proposal remains in flux, diplomats and officials have told Reuters. So what is a drone wall and how would it work? Such a defense system would detect incoming drones and be able to counter them. Here's Robert Tollest, research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute.
It's about integrating all of your air defense assets to work together in tandem, from ground radars, fighter jets, cheap interceptor drones, missiles, the whole range of capabilities and electronic warfare to jam these drones, all working in tandem around the clock.
Tollest says cost effectiveness is key. For the Poland incursion on September the 9th, NATO deployed F-35 and F-16 fighter jets, helicopters and a Patriot air defense system collectively worth billions of dollars. The Russian drones they were responding to cost a tiny fraction of that price.
You just can't be firing hundreds or even thousands of $1 million or $500,000 missiles at these drones that generally cost about $50,000 each. That would be the Russians imposing a huge cost on us.
Tolas says technologies such as cheap interceptor drones and lasers exist already, but have yet to be scaled up. The EU initiative is a test of its ambitions to play a greater role in defence, which traditionally falls to national governments and NATO. And it's a challenge to Europe's ability to take more responsibility for its own security, as demanded by Donald Trump and many US presidents before him. The proposal is also caught up in a power struggle over who should control major European defence projects. Germany and France are wary of handing power to the European Commission, the EU's executive body, diplomats told Reuters. Experts say the plan needs broad support from European governments to secure access to EU funding. To try to win more support from southern and western nations, the Commission has broadened the original concept from an integrated thicket of sensors, jamming systems and weapons along the eastern border to a web of anti-drone systems across the continent. Once the Commission has fleshed out its proposal, EU governments will decide whether to give it the green light. But experts say cost, scale and cross-border integration remain major challenges, with decisions to be made on which systems to buy, where to use them and how to link them all together. Tolas added, Ukraine's drone defence efforts in the Russian war show it's likely to be an evolving project.
That's a constantly evolving evolution between the attacking side and the defending side. So we'll be standing up different capabilities to try and defend European airspace with the drone wall. So that it's not going to be an announcement like we've now built the drone wall. It's going to be something that will take a number of years.
However, some officials and industry executives say they can see the initiative up and running within a year if the EU leaders can show serious political will.
Swiss engineering company ABB said it's seeing strong customer demand. It's particularly from a surge in new data centers being built in the US to process artificial intelligence. ABB makes factory robots as well as motors and drives for factory production lines. On Thursday, it also said it was seeing little impact on customers from US import tariffs as it reported its third quarter results. ABB said its operating earnings before tax rose 12% to $1.74 billion, while new orders in the US jumped 27% during the period. ABB generates around 7% of group revenues from data centers, up 6% a year ago. It provides electrification products to keep server rooms online. Earlier this week, ABB announced a partnership with chipmaker NVIDIA to develop the next generation of data centers. The company currently produces locally around 75 to 80% of the products it sells in the US and is aiming to reach 90% by investing more in US factories.
Nestle will cut 16,000 jobs in what it argues is an effort to become more efficient. That was the message from new CEO Philip Navratil on Thursday as the firm tries to raise sales volumes. He said 12,000 white-collar jobs would go and 4,000 more will depart through initiatives in manufacturing and supply chain. The Swiss maker of Kit Kat chocolate bars and Nespresso coffee also reported better than expected sales growth Wednesday. It cited pricing-led improvements in coffee and confectionery. Nestle reported a 1.5% third-quarter rise in real internal growth, which is a measure of sales volumes. That was well above analyst expectations. The world's largest packaged food company has fought to re-energise stalling sales growth. It also wants to stop a sharp share price slide as costs have risen and debt levels climbed amid rising investor pressure. Navratil recently replaced former Nestle head Laurent Frex. He was fired last month over an undisclosed relationship with a direct report.
A dangerous tipping point is being seen in our oceans due to global warming. Researchers now warn that the world's coral reefs are in an almost irreversible die-off sooner than expected.
We've become clearer that we've passed a tipping point for the dieback of perhaps the majority of tropical coral reefs.
A new report by 160 researchers ahead of the COP30 climate summit says global warming is accelerating an unstoppable dieback. Tropical coral reefs are already dying off in the heat. Average global temperatures have risen 1.3 to 1.4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, according to UN and EU science agencies' data, surprising scientists by the speed of change. Andrea Rivera Sosa is from the Coral Reef Alliance.
This increase in heat has been exponential, and it's very high, and the reefs are just not able to recover.
Scientists say the extra heat has caused 80% of coral reefs close to the equator to bleach, which makes them vulnerable to disease and death. Tom Lenton, who's the lead author of the report, says a tipping point of 1.2 degrees Celsius has been crossed, with the worst bleaching event on record over 2024 to 25.
So that kind of confirmed our collective deduction that the tipping point, the sort of temperature tipping point for corals was probably below 1.5 degrees C.
UN climate experts had set a 1.5 degree limit for temperature rise due to climate change. Now scientists are imploring countries at November's COP30 to work even more on bringing down climate warming carbon emissions. Progress has been made. Renewable energy has generated more electricity than coal for the first time this year, according to non-profit think tank Ember. But coral reef bleaching has already become critical.
What happens with coral bleaching is that this symbiosis, this relationship between the animal and the algae, becomes disrupted. So the algae no longer stays within the tissues of the coral, leaving it without its color, leaving it weaker and vulnerable because it doesn't receive the nutrients and the food sources that the algae provides for the coral.
Reef ecosystems play a vital role supporting marine biodiversity, and experts say it's not just about preserving coral ecosystems, but also the food and livelihoods they provide to people, particularly in coastal communities.